News of the times. The Kidsgrove tragedy. Murder, madness, and the man who vanished into himself. 1911, Staffordshire. The quiet mining community of Kidsgrove is shattered by an act so brutal, so deliberate, that it stuns the nation. In a secluded villa on the edge of town, a widow, her 4-year-old daughter, and a teenage servant are found savagely murdered, stabbed, beaten, left to die in what should have been the safety of their own home. The implement of death, a chisel. No signs of forced entry, no screams reported, just silence, until the 8-year-old child came running for help. The killer? A man who knew the house, who came with purpose and vanished without a trace. As police launched a desperate manhunt across counties, one name rose to the surface: Karl Kramer, a German labourer with a borrowed bicycle, a forged name, and a cash box full of stolen silver. But when they finally caught him, the question was no longer just what he had done, but whether he even knew he'd done it at all. This is a story of murder, madness, and a man who vanished into himself. A case that would end not at the gallows, but behind the locked doors of Broadmoor. And in today's end of episode further particular segment, a boy, some pocket money, and one very dead mother. The playdate was going splendidly until the neighbours noticed the smell. Now, if this all sounds better than a slice of your nan's homemade apple pie, preferably before she drops the bottle of brandy into it, do consider giving that like button a gentle tap. Then sit back, settle in, and enjoy the story. And be sure to put those carpentry tools somewhere safely out of arm's reach. You never know who's watching. In 1911, Kidsgrove was a modest but industrious town in North Staffordshire. Nestled near the Cheshire border, like much of the region, it was built on coal, specifically the sprawling Birchwood Colliery, one of the largest coking and coal byproduct works in the country. This was a time of soot, pickaxes and progress, where the hum of industry and the clatter of railways formed the backdrop to everyday life. Avenue Villa, the site of the murder, stood slightly apart from the town's bustle, tucked behind trees, with a winding drive and the kind of genteel seclusion that suggested middle-class aspiration. It was quite literally off the beaten track. But it wasn't just local labourers keeping the furnaces running. As Britain's industries expanded, so too did its appetite for technical expertise, and this included hiring workers from abroad. In Kidsgrove, a German engineering firm had been brought in to erect a modern coking plant for the colliery. Several German nationals, engineers and labourers alike, were working in the area, including Mr. William Lehr, who boarded at Mrs. Weir's home. In 1911, a woman like Mrs. Mary Weir, newly widowed with young children, stood on an economic tightrope. Her late husband had been a colliery manager, placing the family firmly in the middle class. But with no husband's income and limited employment opportunities for respectable women, many widows turned to the one social acceptable solution: taking in a lodger. Mrs. Weir did just that, opening her home to Mr. William Lehr, a German engineer working at the nearby Birchwood Colliery. Lodging a professional man offered both income and proprietary, a practical compromise to an era when widows were expected to maintain appearances without appearing to need help. It was a common solution for uncommon times, but in Mrs. Weir's case, it would prove a fatal one. From the Staffordshire Advertiser, the 9th of October 1911, triple murder at Kidsgrove. One of the most brutal crimes of recent years was perpetrated at Kidsgrove on Monday morning, when 3 people were done to death, apparently by the same hand. The victims were Mrs. Mary Howarth Weir, widow of the late Mr. J.C. Weir, colliery manager, and Margaret Barclay Chapman Weir, the daughter of the last named, and Mary Hambledon, 16, a domestic employed by Mrs. Weir and a native of Chesterton. Both in the number of the victims and in the circumstances surrounding the crimes, the threefold murder stands out as exceptionally cowardly and revolting. Mrs. Weir and her late husband came to live at the Avenue Villa in Kidsgrove some months ago from Porthill, Mr. Weir being interested in the opening of the Harcastle collieries about 2 years ago. Unfortunately, Mr. Weir died only 3 days after removing into his new residence. Mrs. Weir and their children, aged 8, 6 and 4 respectively, continued to reside at the Avenue Villa together with the unfortunate domestic, whilst about a week before the crime 2 German engineers named Mr. William Lear and Mr. Paul Schroeder, who were superintending the erection of a coking plant at the Birchwood Colliery Company Works, went to reside there as boarders. The villa, the scene of the murders, stands in fairly extensive and wooded grounds and faces Liverpool Road, the main road leading from Cheshire to Turnstall. The entrance is approached by a winding drive so that the villa is practically secluded from the view of any passers. The residence of the general manager of Birchwood Colliery stands on the west side of Avenue Villa. During the dinner hour on Monday, Mr. J. Shrives, headmaster of the Kidsgrove National School, was astonished to see Mrs. Weir's 8-year-old daughter running down St. John's Wood from the direction of her home in a state of terror and screaming in a hysterical manner. Unable to understand the poor child's story, Mr. Sheaves ran along to the villa and, in the company with the Mr. Booth, the gardener for Mr. Allott, entered the house. Downstairs everything was in order, but upstairs a spectacle horrible in the extreme was witnessed. In the front bedroom lay the bodies of Mrs. Weir and her 4-year-old daughter, whilst on the landing leading to the bedroom was found the body of the servant girl. By this time others' help had arrived and the doctors in the district had been sent for. Dr. Rex, J.P. and Dr. Furness were quickly on the scene. At that time the bodies were slightly warm, but death in each case had taken place, according to the opinions of the medical men, about 2 hours previously. Terrible injuries had been inflicted on the unfortunate victims. An examination of Mrs. Weir's head and face revealed the fact that her left cheekbone was broken and that she had been stabbed about the head and neck. The little child had been stabbed near the left ear, and the servant girl appeared to have been clubbed on top of the head. In addition to having been stabbed about 5 times in the throat, each victim, in addition, had been stabbed in the heart. The object, or rather the cause, of the crime appears to have been robbery, for a cash box belonging to Mr. Lear, one of the German boarders, was found to have been opened. The circumstances point to the fact that the murderer had some knowledge of the presence of the cash box in Mr. Lear's bedroom and went to the villa between 10 and 11 a.m., knowing that only Mrs. Weir and her servant would be in the house. Mrs. Weir appears to have been making the bed when the assassin surprised her. The little girl lay dead with her in the bedroom, whilst the position in which the servant's body was found indicated that whilst at work downstairs she had been attacked and attracted by the noise. Preparations had been made for washing clothes, and it was suggested that the girl Hambledon was in the wash house when the murderer entered the house. The police soon formed an opinion as to the identity of the murderer and circulated the following description to the various police stations. Wanted in this county on a charge of triple murder of a woman, a servant girl and a child, also of stealing £26, 11 shillings and 7pence, value approximately £3,700 in 2025, and a chequebook on the National Provincial Bank, Newcastle branch. Karl Kramer, a German, about 31 years of age, 5'7" or 8 inches, nut brown hair, brown bristly moustache, otherwise clean shaven, high cheekbones, medium build, stoop when walking, flat chested and a villainous looking dress, green single peak cap, dark green suit, turned down collar, tie and black boots. Kramer speaks good German and broken English. About Karl Kramer. On September the 19th last, Karl Kramer went to work for a German firm at Kidsgrove and was discharged on September the 27th. It was thought that he had left the district, but about 9:30 on this date he was seen going in the direction of the house where the murders were committed. At about 11 a.m. he called at a shop where he had left his bicycle some distance from the place of the crime, and he rode hurriedly away in the direction of Crewe. The man had served in the 131st Infantry German Army, and he has in his possession a boat ticket between Grimsby and Antwerp. Great Central Railway issues about the beginning of August, and which is good for 6 months. Kramer came to Kidsgrove from Garden Terrace, Panthorpe in Gilston, Wakefield, where he worked for a person or firm of the name of Lucas as general labourer and handyman. A German firm of engineers is erecting a coking plant at Birchamwood Colliery, Mr. Lear, the gentleman already referred to, being in charge of the work. In the course of an interview, Mr. Lear explained that he had found employment for 3 German labourers, but they only remained in his employ until Wednesday week, when, owing to some little trouble, they were discharged and he had not seen them since. The 3 Germans stayed together at Golden Hill, and all were now missing. Mr. Lear added that when he moved from his previous apartment to Mrs. Weir's a week before the murder, 2 of the Germans conveyed his box, and these were taken into the bedroom where the murder was committed. During the weekend, Mr. Lear's office on the works was broken into and a hammer and a few joiner's chisels stolen. Nothing was found, however, on the scene of the murder to indicate with what instrument the savage deed had been committed, nor was there, in fact, anything to give the police a clue as to the murderer. The wanted man, Kramer, came to lodge at a provision shop in the High Street in Golden Hill on the 21st inst, and was subsequently joined by 2 compatriots. The landlady states that Kramer brought some luggage and a bicycle, and on Friday morning she was greatly surprised on coming downstairs to find that he was missing. He had taken his bicycle, but he left his working clothes and some belongings. The arrest of Kramer. Kramer, the wanted German labourer, was arrested on Thursday near Doncaster and was received in custody by Inspector Dix and Willis of the Staffordshire Constabulary the same night. He was brought to Kidsgrove yesterday, Friday evening, and was identified by Mr. Lear. Prisoner made a statement denying that he was the murderer. It is stated that when arrested, the prisoner was wearing a new suit of clothes and that his moustache had been shaved off. The police have recovered the bicycle on which it is alleged the prisoner made his escape from Staffordshire. Kramer will be brought up at Kidsgrove Police Court this Saturday morning. As the shock settled over Kidsgrove and the press scrambled to reconstruct the horror inside Avenue Villa, police moved quickly. Near Doncaster, a German labourer was quietly taken into custody, clean-shaven, newly dressed, and carrying a false name. He denied everything, but in Kidsgrove a witness recognised him. And so began one of the most unusual courtroom spectacles in Staffordshire's recent history. The accused seemingly shrinking into himself, silent, unresponsive, and possibly mad. From the Staffordshire Advertiser, the 14th of October 1911, the Kidsgrove tragedy. Kramer before the magistrates. On Saturday, Karl Kramer, the German who is in custody in connection with the murders of Mrs. Weir on the 2nd inst, was brought before the magistrates in the charge room at Kidsgrove Police Station. At the outset, the prisoner was asked by Mr. T. Griffin, the stipendiary magistrate's clerk, "Do you understand English?" The prisoner replied, "I do not at all." Mr. Griffin proceeded to read the charge in English and asked the prisoner if he understood it, to which he replied, "I do not understand." An interpreter was then called and asked to translate the charge for the prisoner. The interpreter, after addressing the prisoner in German, observed, "He says he has not done it." Inspector Dix then gave evidence that he had received the prisoner from the custody of the police at Doncaster on the previous Friday. Witness read the warrant to him and cautioned him, and he replied, "I do not understand what you say. You must tell me in German. I don't know what you mean." Witness brought him to Kidsgrove. The prisoner spoke very good English on the way, and he admitted to the witness at Doncaster that his name was Karl Kramer, but said he had got another name, that of von Bolmir. Prisoner now stated through the interpreter that he did not know where Doncaster was. John Oakes, stonemason of Heathcote Street in Kidsgrove, said on the day of the murder he was at work at the stone yard near the Harecastle Hotel. At about 11:30, the prisoner fetched his bicycle from the yard and rode away in the direction of Cheshire. Prisoner then had a moustache. The interpreter having read the evidence to Kramer, he said the prisoner stated that he was in Kidsgrove and had his bicycle from there on Monday morning, but he did not know where the works were. The magistrate's clerk to the interpreter, "Tell him, since he has been away, he has had his moustache shaved off." The interpreter put the point to the prisoner and replied, "He says he has had his moustache shaved off." The magistrate's clerk then said the police desired a remand until the following Friday. The interpreter said the prisoner said he would be pleased to wait until Friday. Would they get him an interpreter he could understand? Mr. Griffin: "What countryman is he? That is the point." The interpreter: "He says he is an Austrian, but he wants a German interpreter." In less than 24 hours, Karl Kramer had gone from speaking passable, even confident English during his journey with Inspector Dix, to suddenly claiming he understood nothing at all. By the time he appeared before the magistrate at Stoke, even that effort had vanished. He said nothing, responded to no one, and kept his head bowed and his eyes closed. Whether it was a performance on the onset of genuine collapse, and what followed marked the beginning of what would later be described as a prolonged fugue state, one that would carry him through every stage of the legal process. Yesterday's proceedings. Kramer was brought up at the Stoke Town Hall yesterday, Friday. A large crowd awaited outside the hall for nearly an hour before his arrival, obtaining a brief glimpse of the prisoner as he was hustled out of a taxicab which was conveyed him from Stoke station and into the town hall. Kramer, normally a short man, kept his head huddled on his chest and his eyes closed, and under these circumstances looked an extremely diminutive being between two tall police officers. At Stafford, his custodians found it necessary to almost carry their captive onto the station. Kramer maintained the same attitude at Stoke and appeared almost oblivious to everything that was going on around him. The crowd set up a vigorous hoot on his arrival, but did not attempt to interfere with the prisoner. Kramer's appearance as he entered the Grand Committee room where the magistrates were sitting was one of utter collapse. His hands were clasped together in front and secured by handcuffs. His drooping head and closed eyes made it almost to impossibilities to recognize his features, and he appeared to be bearing all of his weight on the arms of the officers on either side of him. A more abject picture could hardly be imagined. Kramer was accommodated with a seat. When the case was called on, the diminutive German, after being twice roused by the police, got on his feet but kept his eyes closed and his head bowed. The charge was interpreted to the prisoner by Herr Arnold Schmidt, principal of the Berlitz School in Hanley. Kramer made no reply, and indeed appeared to be unconscious of what was happening. Inspector Dix repeated his evidence given at Kidsgrove on the previous Saturday, and this was translated to Kramer by the interpreter, but still no sound escaped the prisoner's lips. "Do you wish to ask questions?" queried the interpreter. Kramer made no reply, and it was difficult to understand whether he was really in a state of collapse or whether his attitude was wholly assumed. John Oakes, the stonemason, also repeated his evidence and stated that the yard from which the prisoner fetched his bicycle was about 500 yards away from Avenue Villa. The prisoner vouchsafed no reply. Superintendent Hickling then said he had been instructed by the prosecutor to ask for a remand until next Friday, when it was hoped they would be in a position to go on with the case. The prisoner, he said, had maintained his sullen attitude since Saturday. The remand was granted. The prisoner was kept at the town hall until 12:30, when he was then expeditiously removed to Stoke station and conveyed to Stafford on the 12:50 train. Despite Kramer's sudden silence and posture of passive resistance, police efforts did not slow. Behind the courtroom scenes, investigators were steadily reconstructing his movements in the hours and days following the murder. What emerged was a trail of transactions and transformations: the hurried shaving of a moustache, the purchase of new clothes, and a sudden conspicuous display of spending by a man previously unemployed. It had all the hallmarks of someone attempting to change not just his appearance, but his identity. We understand that the Staffordshire police have received some important information relative to the prisoner's movements subsequent to the alleged murder. Inquiries show that a man answering Kramer's description called at the barber's shop at Macclesfield and there had his moustache shaved off. Kramer has also been traced to Leeds, where it is stated he purchased a rolled gold guard and visited a clothier's shop, this being on the evening of the day the crime was committed. In a room at the rear of this shop, Kramer, it is alleged, changed his clothes and put on a new suit which he purchased there. On leaving, he took away his discarded clothes in a green suitcase, and the police, very anxious to ascertain the whereabouts of this case. Additional information is also forthcoming respecting the bicycle on which Kramer left Kidsgrove. This, a gentleman's ordinary roadster model, he appears to have sold to a man at York, but it is not yet known how he became possessed of the Premier bicycle which he had now when he was arrested. With Kramer now in custody, silent, stooped, and unresponsive, the legal machinery began to turn. Though he had the right to attend the coroner's inquest, he declined. Outside the courtroom, however, the police pressed on, methodically reconstructing his movements and gathering testimony. What unfolded was a growing web of circumstantial evidence, each statement, each sighting, adding weight to the narrative of a man on the run, trying to shed his past as quickly as he changed his clothes. From the Staffordshire Advertiser, the 21st of October 1911, the Kidsgrove murders. The adjourned inquest on the bodies of Mrs. Weir, 38, Margaret Weir, 4, and Mary Ellen Hambledon, 16, the victims of the Kidsgrove murders, was reopened on Thursday at Kidsgrove before Mr. Hugh W. Adam, the county coroner. The coroner observed that it was common knowledge that a man named Karl Kramer was in custody charged with the murders. He had the right to attend the inquest if he desired, but he had intimated that he did not wish to attend. The first witness was Mr. William Lair, the German engineer who had been living at Avenue Villa as a lodger. He confirmed that Kramer had helped him move in and that on 2 separate occasions Kramer had entered his room. The second time, Lair recalled being surprised to find him already standing in the doorway. Lair's cash box, which he usually kept in his bedroom, had been broken open and emptied. Just under £30 in cash, a chequebook and a ticket to Antwerp were all missing. Crucially, although Lair had carried the cash box himself during the move, Kramer had seen exactly where it was placed. When Lair returned from work on the day of the murders, the box was gone, and so were Mrs. Weir, her daughter, and the maid. The medical evidence. Dr. Greatorex described the wounds. The servant had 5 puncture wounds and 3 superficial wounds in the neck. He judged she had been dead for about 2 hours. A wound in the child's left temple penetrated the skull, which was fractured, suggesting the idea that the instrument used, perhaps a chisel or a stiletto, had been twisted. The mother's head was reclining on a child's doll. On her temple was a wound which had fractured the skull. Death must have been instantaneous in every case. In each instance, the principal wound was in the left temple. There were 4 cuts in the region of Mrs. Weir's heart. Inspector Willis deposed that he had received Kramer from the Doncaster police. Prisoner understood and replied to questions regarding his identity. When the warrant was read over, however, Kramer replied, "I don't understand what you say. Tell me in German." He said that in good English. The same day, Kramer was brought to Kidsgrove. He had on a new suit of clothes, but his underclothes were old and dirty. Witness found blood stains on some of his underclothing and on his cap. Nothing was missed from the house but the cash box mentioned. Apparently, the man went straight in. A witness from the Red Bull Inn at Church Lawton placed Kramer there at about 7 a.m. on the morning of the murders. He was seen with the same bicycle later recovered by police, and by that point his moustache was already gone. Miss Annie Maud Hill of High Street, Golden Hill, said she saw the prisoner at about 9:30 at Church Lawton while out driving with her sister. Kramer was then pushing his bicycle in the direction of Kidsgrove. Dr. J. Russell, who made the post-mortem examination with Dr. Furness, said he was of the opinion that the wounds which resulted in fractures of the skull were caused by a blunt instrument with a circular surface about an inch in diameter. Dr. Furness corroborated. When he saw Kramer at Kidsgrove police station, he pointed out suspicious spots on his cap, and these proved to be bloodstains. Multiple civilian witnesses helped flesh out Kramer's movements that morning. Around 9:45 a.m. he was seen by Mrs. Annie Stubbs leaving his bicycle in a shed on Liverpool Road before walking off in the direction of Avenue Villa. Roughly 10 minutes later, Mrs. Eliza Stanfield watched from her bedroom window just yards away, and she saw a man matching Kramer's build open the gate and approach the house. But notably, he never came back out. By 11:20 a.m., Ernest Ford, a stonemason, spotted a man he later identified as Kramer hurriedly adjusting bicycle clips in the nearby yard. The man appeared agitated and nervous. That afternoon, sometime between 2 and 3 p.m., Kramer entered a barber's shop in Macclesfield. The barber, Samuel Ryder, recalled that the man not only asked for a shave, he insisted on having his moustache removed, despite being advised against it. And finally, Kramer's landlady, Esther Shufflebotham of Golden Hill, confirmed he had abruptly left his lodgings a few days earlier, still owing her rent. By the time the inquest resumed, Kramer was once again brought before the court, unchanged in appearance and demeanour. His lethargy, his downcast eyes, and apparent detachment remained constant, but this time a shadow of doubt crept in. According to the prison medical officer, he was no longer clear whether Kramer was genuinely impaired or simply pretending. Kramer again before the magistrates. The case against Karl Kramer was opened at length yesterday, Friday, at the Stoke Stipendiary Court. Mr. W. H. Lay from the Office of the Public Prosecutor conducted the case for the prosecution, and the prisoner was unrepresented. Kramer was brought in by train from Stafford to Stoke, and although he seemed to be in the same condition of collapse as when he appeared at the court a week ago, and apparently unconscious of what was going on, he is stated to have run in order to avoid the attention of the crowd at Stafford. A most important statement as to the prisoner's demeanour was made by Mr. Lay at the close of his opening statement. It was to the effect that the medical officer at Stafford Jail was unable to say whether the prisoner was shamming or was really in a condition of partial incapacity to understand what was going on around him. Prisoner made no reply to the charge when it was read over to him by Herr Arnold Schmidt, the interpreter. The evidence already presented, Kramer's shaving off his moustache, the purchase of a new suit, a gold chain and other items, all paid for in what multiple witnesses described as a suspiciously large quantity of silver and gold was reiterated during this phase of the inquest. It painted once again the image of a man newly flush with money and keen to alter his appearance. But just as the proceedings seemed to be treading familiar ground, a most extraordinary change of events was suddenly and rather surprisingly recounted. The prisoner was next seen at about 9:30 in the smoke room at the Prince of Wales Hotel in Leeds. There an extraordinary incident took place. In the smoke room was a number of men and two women, and a man was playing a piano, and to the tune he was playing both women danced with the prisoner. Robbed at Leeds. Kramer apparently was standing drinks lavishly, paying for drinks with gold and making himself very popular. Another woman who would be called in as a witness would state that she danced with the prisoner too, and while she was dancing with him, she put her hand into his hip pocket and extracted from it a brown leather bag, which obviously contained money. Having done this, she made her escape from the public house and was followed out by two men who had probably seen her do this. There was a conversation between them, and as a result she shared out with them the contents of the bag, and she stated it amounted to something like £11 in gold. She then tore up the bag and threw it away in some drain. The prisoner was not slow to discover he had been robbed. He went into the lounge and said, "They have robbed me of £27. Kramer, realizing he'd been pickpocketed at the inn, reported the theft to the local police, giving a false name, John Rota, and claiming he had been relieved of £27. Although he returned briefly the next morning, he collected his old clothes and left Leeds without explanation. For a supposedly penniless working man, he showed surprising little interest in recovering such a substantial sum. Kramer next appeared in York, claiming to have bicycled from London and to be in need of money. Using the aliases of von Holtmann, his second false name in as many days, he sold his bicycle for 13 shillings and spent the night locally. But instead of heading north to Middlesbrough as claimed, he travelled south towards Doncaster. At a nearby village he took lodgings and played cards with the landlord, and that evening a local newspaper arrived, and with it Kramer's photograph. The resemblance was unmistakable. Kramer went quiet, visibly shaken, and asked to go to bed early. The landlord, now suspicious, alerted the police. Kramer left early the next morning and was arrested shortly after in Doncaster. As the inquest unfolded and public interest surged, police began delving into Kramer's past. What they uncovered added a deeply unsettling layer to the case. Years earlier, Kramer had been committed to an asylum after exhibiting a strikingly similar fugue-like state, withdrawn, unresponsive, and seemingly unaware of his surroundings. He had eventually recovered and been released. But now, as he sat silent and inert in the courtroom, the question resurfaced with new urgency. Was Kramer relapsing into madness or meticulously faking it? The prisoner continued, Mr. Levy had been an inmate of a county asylum in Epsom in Surrey. He was there in February 1909, and his demeanour there, according to the reports of the medical officer, were similar to his demeanour that day. It turned out to be a temporary and passing phase from which he recovered and was eventually discharged as sane. There was, however, during his detention at the asylum, a phase in which it was quite impossible for him to understand what was going on around him. Two witnesses were called, Mrs. Shufflebottom, the prisoner's landlady, and Mr. Shroves, who discovered the murder. Their evidence was read over to Kramer, who kept his head bent on his chest and made no sign of recognition. The only animated part of his body seemed to be his fingers, which twitched incessantly. "Do you understand?" asked the interpreter. The chairman, Mr. Boddington, then said the bench had carefully considered the demeanour of the man. They could not be sure whether he fully understood what was said, and the following on the evidence which Mr. Lay had brought from the prison doctor at Stafford, who did not know whether the prisoner was compos mentis or not, they suggested it might be advisable to adjourn the case so the prisoner might be kept under observation. Mr. Lay said on that suggestion he had only one course, and that was where there was so grave a doubt as to whether the man understood or not what was going on, it would perhaps be better to adjourn. Mr. Griffin, the stipendiary magistrate's clerk, said it was more a matter for the public prosecutor than the bench as to whether the question should be left for a jury to decide. If Mr. Lay thought it right to go on, the magistrate were prepared to hear the evidence. If, on the other hand, he did not feel inclined to proceed against a man when it was doubtful whether he understood what was going on, observations might be kept on the prisoner, and perhaps a specialist could examine him. Mr. Lay said personally he did not mind which course was taken. The chairman said in view of that magistrates were prepared to take up the position that they did not think it was proper to proceed and would adjourn the hearing until Friday next. Regardless of the swirling questions surrounding Karl Kramer's mental state, the court proceeded with caution. Evidence continued to be presented, including the testimony of Kramer's landlady and the man who first discovered the murders. Kramer, however, remained motionless and unresponsive. His only signs of life confined to the constant twitching of his fingers. Faced with the disturbing uncertainty of whether the accused could understand the proceedings, the magistrates conferred. On the evidence and advice of the prosecution and in light of medical testimony suggesting possible mental incapacity, they agreed that a pause was necessary. The case was adjourned once again, not for lack of evidence, but for closer observation of the man at the centre of it all. From the Staffordshire Advertiser, the 28th of October, 1911, the triple murder at Kidsgrove. Mr. H. W. Adams, resuming his inquiry into the terrible tragedy committed at Kidsgrove on October the 2nd at the Town Hall. Kidsgrove on Monday morning, and the inquest was closed in the afternoon. The jury returned a verdict of willful murder against Karl Kramer, the German labourer, who is in custody on the capital charge. The final day of the inquest reiterated much of the already heard testimony. Kramer's movements through Leeds and York, his purchases of new clothes and accessories, and the considerable sums of silver and gold he appeared to have on him. Two new developments, however, stood out. First was the testimony of Dora Golston, who admitted with a mix of cheer and tipsiness to dancing with Kramer at a Leeds pub, pickpocketing a leather pouch from his coat and dividing its contents, £13 in gold, between herself and the two onlookers who caught her in the act. Kramer reported the theft to police that night, giving the false name of John Rutter, but showed little interest in pursuing the matter the following morning. The second detail came from a York landlord and bicycle dealer who confirmed Kramer attempted to sell his bicycle under yet another alias, Alfred Woltman, and was questioned by local police. Although nothing seemed suspicious at the time, Kramer's efforts to offload the bicycle and fabricate his movements now appeared as part of a broader pattern of evasion. With the evidence now complete and witnesses from multiple counties having pieced together a coherent chain of Kramer's movements, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: willful murder. The coroner briefly addressed the jury, remarking that they would have very little hesitation in coming to the conclusion that a particularly foul and brutal murder had been perpetrated. They had a great deal of evidence as to the movements of the man Karl Kramer, and he proceeded to touch upon some of the more striking points in the chain of evidence which seemed to connect him with the crime. The jury were not in any sense trying the man. They had only to say whether they considered on the facts brought before them that there was a case in which this man should stand trial. If they thought so, they must say so. The jury retired, but were absent only 5 minutes. The foreman said the jury had unanimously come to a verdict of willful murder against Karl Kramer. Kramer being under the strict medical observation at Stafford Prison, it was arranged that he should not appear at Stoke County Police Court yesterday. The verdict from the inquest was as inevitable as it was grim: willful murder. The police were commended for the clarity and thoroughness of the case they had built, a chain of circumstantial evidence stretching across counties, shops and aliases. But as the formal proceedings advanced, a far more complex question began to take centre stage. Was Karl Kramer truly insane, or simply pretending to be? From the Staffordshire Advertiser, the 4th of November 1911, the Kidsgrove tragedy. At the Stoke County Police Court yesterday, Friday, before H. Boddington and P. H. Willett, the case in which Karl Kramer is charged with willful murder at Kidsgrove on October the 2nd was again called on. Kramer was in precisely the same condition physically and mentally as when he was last present a fortnight ago, and had to be almost carried into the town hall by 2 warders. Mr. W. R. Lay, who again appeared on behalf of the Director of Public Prosecution, said that since he was before them a fortnight ago, the prisoner had been examined by 2 eminent medical specialists on the instruction of the Home Secretary. The conclusion to which these gentlemen had arrived was that at the time the prisoner was neither sane nor capable of defending himself against a criminal charge. He therefore asked the bench to remand the case. The prisoner was committed for trial upon the coroner's inquisition. From the Staffordshire Advertiser, the 18th of November 1911, the Kidsgrove triple murders. Kramer found insane. Karl Kramer, 28, fitter, was indicted on the coroner's inquisition for the murders of Mary Hogarth, Howard Weir, Ellen Hambledon and Mary Barclay Chapman Weir at Kingsgrove on October the 2nd. The prisoner had to be literally carried into the dock by 2 warders. He was given a seat and immediately sank in a heap with his head on his chest until he was almost invisible to those in the court. He was called upon to plead, but made no answer to the Clerk of Assizes. Mr. Cranstoun, who appeared for the Crown, submitted that the first question to be tried was asked to whether the prisoner was capable of pleading. His lordship explained to the jury that if there was reason to suppose that a prisoner was in such a state of mind that he was unfit to plead, it was the duty of the jury, before he was tried on that charge, to consider whether he was fit to plead or not. Mr. Cranstoun said the sole question the jury had to try now was whether, at the present time, whether the prisoner was called upon to plead, he was sane or not. The issue they had to try was under the Act of 1880, which laid it down that if a person indicted for an offence was insane and was upon arraignment found to be so, the jury impanelled for that purpose, it should be lawful for the court to direct such finding to be recorded and order such person to be kept in strict custody until His Majesty's pleasure was known. In this case, we should endeavour to show that at the present time the prisoner was unable to understand what was going on. It was essential that a prisoner on his trial should be able to say reasonably and knowing what he was saying, whether he was guilty or not. It was also necessary that he should be able to follow the examination and take an interest in it. He should call Sir Richard Brain, who was the Home Office expert in lunacy matters and also the prison doctor. Sir Richard Brain said he was one of the Home Office experts acting on the instructions of the Secretary of State. He visited Stafford Jail on October the 28th and examined the prisoner with Dr. Nicholson, another Home Office official. Questions were put to him on that occasion, but they could elicit no reply. He was sitting in the infirmary then very much as he was that day, with his body and head bent forward, and the only movements he showed was the twitching of the right forefinger. Prisoner was tested in several ways, but they were unable to get any response from him. Attempts were made to rouse him up, but he exerted a passive resistance. He was in a state of rigidity the whole time and sank onto the floor. Witness saw him again on the 29th when there was an interpreter present. An attempt was made to engage Kramer in conversation, but without success. Witness saw him again the previous evening and had him removed from the infirmary to another room, where he applied some tests as to sensibility. The results were entirely negative. Witness had formed the opinion that the prisoner was then and now in a state of mental stupor and was quite incapable of exercising his mental faculties in any way. Prisoner was in such a mental condition that he was not able to understand and appreciate the nature of the proceedings. He was insane and incapable of defending himself against a criminal charge. His Lordship: I suppose both of you looked carefully to see whether this was shamming or not? Witness: oh yes, my lord, that was carefully considered, and I am certain of opinion that the prisoner was not shamming. His Lordship said the jury had to decide whether the prisoner was capable of taking part in his trial or whether he was insane and could not. The tests which were applied on whether he had sufficient intellect to understand the course of the proceedings and defend himself properly, whether he could understand details of the evidence, keep it against him, whether he could object, if necessary, to any of the jurymen, and whether he could instruct counsel or a solicitor to defend him. If he was in such a state of mental disease or weakness that he could not do that, and then it would be wrong to try him and convict him of an offence when he did not in the least understand what was going on and he was not able to defend himself. Both medical witnesses agreed that the prisoner was in such a state of mind that he was not capable of understanding the proceedings. The jury immediately found that the prisoner was insane. His Lordship: on that finding of the jury, I will order such finding to be recorded and the prisoner to be kept in strict custody until His Majesty's pleasure be known. The prisoner was then removed from the dock and had to be carried down the steps to the cells by the two warders. Karl Kramer was duly found insane and ordered to be held at His Majesty's pleasure, most likely transferred to Broadmoor, the institution for the criminally insane. From there, he slipped from the public record, his fate unreported, his name gradually fading from view. But the Kidsgrove tragedy, the senseless slaughter of a widow, her young daughter and their servant girl for the price of a stolen cash box, would not so easily be forgotten. 3 lives taken for £30. A community left reeling, and a question that would never be answered with certainty. Was it madness or design? Further particulars. And in today's further particulars segment, news that might give Victorian etiquette manuals cause for a quick rewrite, we bring you the case of a young boy in Glamorganshire who, rather than reporting the death of his mother, opted instead to throw what can only be described as a polite, if morbid, house party. The rules are simple. Come in, play nicely, don't open that door, mummy's sleeping. What follows is a story that combines childhood optimism, early onset budgeting skills, and a somewhat generous interpretation of the phrase, rest in peace. From the Liverpool Courier and Commercial Advertiser, the 27th of June 1911. Boy's extraordinary conduct invites playmates with mother lying dead. A remarkable tragedy was discovered yesterday by the police at Porthcawl in Glamorganshire. Some time ago, a Mr. and Mrs. Richardson took a furnished house in Mackworth Road where, in the absence of her husband, Mrs. Richardson lived alone with her son, a boy of 9 years. The neighbours noticed that the house had been unusually silent since Wednesday last, and the non-appearance of Mrs. Richardson excited comment. The son, it is stated, seemed to have more leisure than usual for playing, and seemed also to be spending money rather freely. On being questioned as to his mother's health, the lad said she was better then than she had been, and in reply to further questions said that his father had sent him some money. Yesterday, a neighbour communicated with the police, who gained to the entrance into the house and found the woman lying dead in one of the rooms. The body was examined by a doctor, who gave it to his opinion that the death had taken place 6 days previously. It transpires that yesterday the deceased son took a number of his playmates into the house, but prevented them from entering the room where the body was found, saying his mother was sleeping there. That concludes this episode of News of the Times and the terrible tragedies in Edwardian Staffordshire, a tale of murder, madness, and a man who may or may not have known what day it was, but who definitely knew how to spend stolen silver. If you liked the show, we'd be grateful for a like, a subscribe, and a share, especially with that one friend who's always had an unnerving interest in chisels. You know the one. And if you'd like to support the channel and help us keep the stories coming, do check out our Patreon for early access, ad-free episodes, and a complete archive. The link is below in the description. This has been News of the Times, and I'm Robin Coles, Edwardian enthusiast, armchair pathologist, and part-time fireplace inspector. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time for more strange, chilling, and all too human tales from British history.